From Microbe TV, this is TWiP, This Week in Parasitism, episode 203, recorded on February 17th, 2022. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and joining me today from Fort Lee, New Jersey, Dixon Despommier.
Hello, Vincent. I'm looking out the window. It's cloudy, and the temperature was 63 degrees. 63 degrees Fahrenheit. This is February 17th. That's an absurd combination. Tonight, it's supposed to rain like hell, thunder and lightning, and the temperature is going down into the 30s. Welcome to February.
Also joining me here at the incubator in New York, Daniel Griffin.
Hello, everyone.
Daniel, what's the weather out here?
Yeah, I don't know. When I came in, it was very nice.
Yeah.
Our windows are all boarded up. And from Glasgow, Scotland, Christina Naula. Welcome back.
Hello, everybody. I look out of the window and it's black, but my phone app tells me it is cloudy, 3 centigrades, and I think that's 57 Fahrenheit, something like that.
Pretty warm. That's pretty warm.
Yeah, and we're in between two storms, so we just survived one. I'm going to have another one tomorrow.
No, 3 centigrade is cold. 3 Celsius.
Yes, 3 Celsius, yeah.
3 Celsius to Fahrenheit. That would be 37.
Oh, 37. Ooh, I got my conversion wrong.
37 centigrade is body temperature, but the 37 Fahrenheit, just above freezing.
So it's 11 p.m. there, Christina, right?
10.
Yeah. 10 p.m. So in no time of year is it ever light at 10 p.m., right?
No, it is. In the summer, it's usually light until, I don't know, 11:30, something like that. Yeah.
Oh, good. So when we do this in the summer, you can tell us what the weather is like.
I can, yeah. We're very far north. People forget how far north we are.
That's true.
Yeah.
So we just have the Gulf Stream, so we don't have the proper winter weather you get where you are.
That is right.
All right. So we have to solve our case from TWiP 202. Daniel, remind us what was going on there.
Certainly. So we were discussing the case of a man, 60-year-old shopkeeper in the Rohingya camp for displaced Myanmar natives. And this gentleman had a story, 3 months of getting up at night to urinate, very thirsty, losing weight. He then went on to develop a rash on the elbows, the abdomen, very itchy, particularly at night. The rest of the family had the rash as well. He then started to develop a headache, fever, cough, trouble breathing. He goes ahead and seeks medical care. When he is seen, his oxygen saturation has dropped down into the 80s. A little bit more information, past medical, surgical. He's a healthy individual, except for the fact that he is a heavy smoker. He's HIV negative. He's living in one of these dwellings in the camp, tin roof, dirt floors, many people, very crowded. We get a little bit of lab results, elevated white blood cell count, elevated glucose, and that's where we leave it.
We had a good number of case guesses, and the first one is very long.
Take it, Vincent.
I'm going to give that one to Christina.
I was just about to volunteer, so that's okay.
There you go.
Sarah writes, hello to the TWiP quadfecta from a frigid 32F0C evening in Philadelphia. It felt like an eternity waiting for the last episode, but I understand given how busy you are with TWiP. Thank you so much for describing how overfishing could affect parasitic worm-to-fish ratio in the ocean. Absolutely fascinating to learn about ecology. I'm apologizing in advance for the length of this response. After last episode, I resolved to shorten my answers, but then this case presented several problems for this gentleman. I feel terribly for this patient. What a miserable bundle of health issues. I'm happy that he could benefit from Dr. Griffin's care. I hope he recovers. This is a 60-year-old gentleman who presented with 3 months of polyuria, polydipsia, and weight loss of unspecified amount, followed by an eruption of an extremely pruritic rash on his abdomen, finger beds, and on his elbows. We are not told whether flexural surfaces or extensor regions, but I'm guessing flexural. That subsequently spread to his household members. Next, he developed a week of fever, headache, and cough, followed by dyspnea, which prompted him to seek medical attention. Upon admission, he was hypoxemic with 85% on RA. He lives in crowded conditions within a refugee camp where he is located in Bangladesh. He has a heavy smoking history, is HIV negative, works as a shopkeeper, and therefore is exposed to others often. Lab studies we are given are limited to leukocytosis and hyperglycemia to 300 mg per deciliters. We don't have a chest x-ray or respiratory viral panel. I wish I could know whether there was any blood in his cough. There was no mention of diarrhea. If he had hyponatremia, that might point toward Legionnaire's disease, though I didn't hear about camp-wide air conditioning units full of water for amoeba to swim around in the endosymbiotic relationship to Legionella pneumophilia. This may be an example of true, and unrelated, or I'm about to learn about a parasite I haven't heard of. Newly diagnosed diabetes mellitus. Common things being common, someone with several months of polyuria, polydipsia, and weight loss who is found to be hyperglycemic to 300 mg per deciliters on random finger stick has diabetes. Appropriate glycemic control will be important to prevent further infectious complications in the short term and renal, microvascular, and retinal complications in the long term. Stopping here to try and keep my answer from becoming a tome. Pruritic rash, what's going on?
It's too late.
The incredibly itchy rash, itchier at night, that spreads to his household is probably caused by Sarcoptes scabiei. This mite burrows into the skin to lay eggs, is highly active at night, and causes severe itching in most people. I would look for the classic burrows between his fingers using a dermatoscope if one were available. I might consider taking some shavings from his skin to examine under the microscope, although I remember an attending teaching me that this is a very low yield, given that the mites travel vast distances on the skin, and the mite per skin centimetre load tends to be rather low in individuals who aren't immune compromised. Compare with crusted scabies that can develop in people who have compromised immune systems and thus a high mite burden. If I saw the burrows, I'd be comfortable treating him and his family with permethrin. Over all skin, no need to put it in the hair, with a coordinated effort to put any bedding, clothing or other items they had touched under direct sunlight and not touch it for 72 hours, or wash and dry everything at high heat, which I am not sure this is an option in their camp. The scabies mite can only survive for 72 hours without a meal, so I do think that quarantining their household items for 72 hours without touching them and treating the entire household during that time would do the trick. Is this true? Other causes on my differential in order of decreasing likelihood. 1. Tinea corporis is second most likely. 2. Contact dermatitis from any number of irritants in the household is possible, but the spread of the rash to all household members makes this likely, as does the nighttime itch component. 3. Body lice, which are visible to the naked eye and would be unlikely to cause itching between the fingers. 4. Bed bugs, which can cause the entire family to itch and are common in crowded living conditions. However, he would have complained of bites rather than a rash. 5. The location of the rash between his fingers led me away from an allergic reaction to an intestinal parasite. Cutaneous larva migrants would not present in the distribution of his rash, so it is off my differential. I'm going to have to take a quick breath here. Finally, but most urgently, his respiratory infection. I know this is a podcast about parasites, but given that Dr. Griffin was consulted on this case during a global spike in COVID infections, And given that the patient lives in crowded conditions that preclude safety distancing oneself from the pandemic, I'm primed to think that they are dealing with a COVID outbreak in the camp. Fever and headache, followed by subsequent cough and dyspnea, certainly fit the bill for a COVID pneumonia, to which his newly diagnosed diabetes mellitus predisposes him. To avoid the availability heuristic, you could have many other respiratory viruses, including influenza A, B, or a novel influenza virus, parainfluenza, human metapneumovirus, etc. I'd start with a chest X-ray and a respiratory viral panel. I would also collect sputum cultures and consider melioidosis, which would grow as well as Legionella. Given his crowded living conditions in TB endemic area, would have to rule out TB with 3 sets of acid-fast stained sputum, which could reveal non-tubercular mycobacterial infections, which tend to be more subacute in presentation. In this region of the world, the dimorphic fungus Talaromyces, with its bright red pigment, I think of red high heels, talon, can infect immune-compromised hosts, but I don't think he is immune-compromised. I wonder about acute pulmonary histoplasmosis. If he were in the southwest of the US, I would also consider acute pulmonary coccidioidomycosis, which can present in a flu-like fashion. Acute pulmonary blastomycosis, if he were on the eastern portion of the US and Canada. My guess, though, is COVID. I really wish I could think of a parasitic cause. If he had diarrhea, more chronic symptoms, and bloody cough, I'd say paragonimus. This show makes me ridiculously happy. I'm so very grateful to you for making it. I learned so much from you, and I'm so happy for the opportunity to learn near the beginning of residency. Looking forward to the next episode. Sarah.
Wow.
That was impressive.
That was
sounds like
really
she should join our
impressive.
staff.
So MS4, Daniel, is what?
Medical student 4th year. So she's probably getting right near the end. And this summer, probably going to be starting a residency somewhere.
Wow.
Cool. Daniel.
All right, Jen writes, hello, TWiP team. I am a huge fan of all things Twix. Thank you for this excellent podcast. I really enjoy listening on my days off from working as a pediatric RN when I spend my free time making art. Weather report here in Rhode Island is sunny with a temperature of 33 degrees Fahrenheit. Here's my guess for this week's case study. The patient is a 60-year-old male living at Rohingya camp. The gentleman's symptoms began 3 months prior to seeking medical help. He reported being up at night with increased urination, increased thirst, and weight loss. Upon exam, his blood glucose was elevated. These symptoms, along with the weight loss and blood glucose, would strongly indicate diabetes. Therefore, diabetes is my first diagnosis. Secondly, the rash. The patient reported itchy rash all over, especially on the hands, also contagious to the rest of the household members. I would love some more information about this rash and really would like to see it. But based on these symptoms and the suboptimal living conditions, my guess would be scabies. Third diagnosis, the dyspnea. This gentleman started with symptoms the week prior to seeking help. His symptoms were reported as fever and headache, followed by cough, difficulty breathing, with oxygen saturations in the 80s. These symptoms would seem to indicate a respiratory infection. It was also reported that there was some kind of respiratory illness in the community. I would strongly suspect SARS-CoV-2 COVID. Those are my guesses. It's a trifecta: diabetes, scabies, and COVID. I hope that he has recovered from the COVID and the scabies and is able to access all that he needs to treat his diabetes. I can only imagine that being difficult in the Rohingya camp. I wish I could do more to help. Thanks for all you do. Sincerely, Jennifer Fallon. P.S. Christine, I love your background. The crochet is beautiful. I would love to hear about it. It seems to be growing.
Yes, it does.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yes, it is not crochet, actually. It is quilt blocks that I'm hand stitching patiently in my evenings when I'm not working. But
and
thank you.
It's going to be eventually sewed together to make a quilt, is that right?
Yes. Yeah, there's actually 2 quilts in the making. The one at the top with the kind of, I don't know what they are, hexagons.
Yeah.
And then the one at the bottom. So there's actually 2 quilts in the making.
The one at the top is viruses.
It's viruses, absolutely.
It's got to be viruses, that's right.
I'm going to turn them into little phages, I think.
It's very nice. So Jennifer listens to TWiP, and she has sent some of her artwork to Amy, I think.
Oh, great.
Oh, that's great.
Yes. Dixon.
Patrick writes, Dear TWiP, I'm writing from southwestern Ontario, Canada, where it is overcast, 75% humidity, minus 15 Celsius, 5 Fahrenheit, and with minimal wind. Not too bad for late January. I write in as a long-time listener, but first-time hopeful diagnoser. I have no connection to the medical or research community, save as a very occasional patient, working instead in municipal planning and natural hazard management, specifically flooding and erosion. Nevertheless, I'm an unabashed parasite fan of the trematodes especially, and have been variably entertained and enlightened by each of you. Thank you so very much for all that you do. As for the case of 60-year-old gentleman from or adjacent to the Kupalong refugee camp described in episode 202, such a setting leads one to imagine a staggering number of potential ailments, but here goes. The initial set of symptoms seemed consistent with uncontrolled diabetes, frequent urination, weight loss, thirst, and later high glucose detected. Any urinary makes me think of chronic infections with Schistosoma hematobium, but the geographic region is suspect, and one would think other symptoms such as hematuria would have presented. The later respiratory symptoms make me immediately contemplate Paragonymous westermani, but something more likely and timely, such as SARS-CoV-2 virus or variant, or the repercussions of heavy smoking habits seem more likely. The relatively sudden onset of respiratory symptoms in conjunction with fever and feeling otherwise poorly makes the acute cause more probable. P. westermani exposure also seems somewhat unlikely based on location and presumed local scarcity of drunken crab. My first thought regarding the rash is scabies, Sarcoptes scabii variant. Noting the intensely itchy rash in many locations, including between the fingers, crowded living situations and household contact provide a ready setting for scabies to be transmitted, and the refugee camp no doubt qualifies. The household suffering the same rash is consistent with a scabies infection. The high white blood cell count could be attributed to this or another simultaneous infection. Lacking any other apparent GI symptoms, I therefore conclude this man is suffering from an unfortunate combination of recent SARS-CoV-2 infection or a similar respiratory infection, suffers from uncontrolled diabetes, itself possible viral induced, and the rash, which is isolated from the other symptoms, is scabies, the disease-causing parasite in question. Thank you again. I look forward to hearing what the actual diagnosis is. Warm wishes from Canada. Pardon me. P.S. I find non-human parasites and parasitoids equally fascinating, and who could fail to be enthralled by the ingenious parasitoid wasps who co-opt their victims' nervous system through the use of a virus which I understand is actually coded in the wasp's genome. Pardon me for a moment. This leads me to wonder, are you aware of any significant human parasites known to be consistently harbored or even generate one or more viruses that subsequently infect the human host? Not sure I understood that question. Cheers, Patrick. Vincent, do you understand that last part?
Yeah, I do. So the parasitoid wasp, you are right, Patrick, that the virus is encoded in the wasp genome. It's fascinating. So, and it infects the caterpillar. So he wants to know if there are any examples in humans of, but I don't know of any. You don't know?
This is whether people have, not encoded in the genome, but there's been a lot of studies, maybe certain parasites carry, vectors. Not that we've actually found that.
No, we know some some protozoan parasites that harbor viruses. They're double-stranded RNA viruses, and they actually are involved in issues of
like leishmania.
Yes, that's right. So,
but not that they transmit to humans, or am I missing?
They don't transmit.
They give the virulence factor to things like trichomonas and that sort of.
Yeah, I mean they're sensed by the innate system, and you get more inflammation as a consequence. But they're parasitic viruses; they do not infect people. Yeah.
Correct.
but who knows? Maybe
But there is
that we know of.
But I already know that Trichinella spiralis larvae, as they migrate through the body in a mouse that's infected with LCM, can actually develop cerebral LCM as a result of the parasite carrying the virus into the brain, and then, of course, the rest is up to the virus. But that's kind of an indirect allusion to what you were discussing.
Alex writes, Dear hosts, the patient is exhibiting symptoms of diabetes, including polyuria, polykisuria, nocturia, weight loss, and elevated glucose. This might have predisposed him to develop a more severe course of disease than the rest of the family, who only have dermatological manifestations. While a hypoxic patient with fever and malaise must nowadays raise suspicion for COVID-19, the elevated white blood count is not typical. If these are neutrophils, I would first consider a bacterial pneumonia, but eosinophilia would be indicative of Loeffler's syndrome, secondary to S. stercoralis hyperinfection as a consequence of immunosuppression in the context of de novo diabetes mellitus. Wow. While Ascaris can also cause Loeffler's, it is not usually associated with a rash.
Right.
Treatment is with ivermectin in support of oxygen. Antibiotics with efficacy against gram-negatives may be considered, as the strongyloides larvae often translocate gut bacteria on their journey, which can cause peritonitis. Afterwards, the suspected diagnosis of diabetes should be evaluated and treatment initiated if necessary. Wow. Alexander's in Vienna, Austria. Cool. Back to Christina.
Druti writes, Dear TWiP Quadfecta, I enjoyed listening to Dr. Sarah Dong's febrile podcast. Thanks for making us aware of her podcast. Yeah, I enjoyed that too, actually, and started listening to back episodes now.
That's great.
Listening to TWiP Case 202, the Mumbai car in me is shouting, TB. A man in his 60s living in a Rohingya camp in Bangladesh, where living conditions are not that great, suffering from chronic cough, night sweats, weight loss with O2 saturations in the 80s. All these point towards tuberculosis. He and his family members are also suffering from rash with itching, and this could be due to scabies infection. My other differentials will be strongyloidiasis and amoebiasis. In this patient, there is a chance of strongyloides hyperinfection due to untreated diabetes, leading to uncontrolled blood sugar levels. Stool ovan parasites, sputum wet mount will be helpful in this case, and serology can be done to rule out strongyloidiasis. Another differential will be amoebiasis. A cough might be caused by diaphragmatic irritation due to hepatic abscess, or there is a chance of sorry, my reading is terrible today. Hematogenous spread of amoebiasis, leading to pleuropulmonary amoebiasis. Serology can be done to rule out amoebiasis. But I guess that this gentleman is suffering from TB due to Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Sputum Sil-Nielsen smear, gene expert, MGIT culture, and culture on elderly can be done. Gene expert and MGIT culture has revolutionized the whole TB diagnosis and treatment. Now that you can perform TB drug sensitivity within 2 to 3 weeks is a boon thanks to MGIT. For scabies, permethrin ointment can be given to the patient as well to family members. And socially, small steps should be taken to improve refugees' economy and living conditions. One thing is sure, that eventually refugees anywhere in the world will come out strong as they have faced the worst. Thanks for the edutainment. Regards, Dr. Druti, who is working in Mumbai.
So, Daniel, what is a gene expert in MGIT culture?
Okay. So let's start with gene experts. So this is where I'm the nerd, right? Like I'm hanging out in Ghana and I'm talking to the laboratory techs, and what do I want to do? Can I go to the lab and actually see the gene expert machine? So it's a machine, and there are these cartridges. It's made by Cepheid. And what you do is you could put a sample in there. The classic for TB is you're going to get a sputum in this cartridge. You're going to pop it in the machine, and then it's going to do basically an amplification. The midget is a way to culture Mycobacterium. So yeah, no, this is great.
Yeah, I had one of the people from Cepheid who developed that on TWiP many years ago.
Oh, that's great.
And he afterwards said, I like this. I'd like to invest in your company, and I never heard of it.
Too bad.
Yeah, I have pictures of me in the Volta Delta next to a Gene Expert machine and the
It's
lab
pretty cool.
techs.
And then they
cool.
they upload the data to the cloud automatically. So you can apparently, he said, there are trucks driving around Africa, and they take miners and they just test them to see if they.
Yeah, they even have cartridges that you can use for SARS-CoV-2 amplification.
Sure,
it's even a little quicker.
Okay.
So yeah, it's great technology.
And what's MGIT culture?
Midget, and it's
Midget?
it's basically a special way to culture the mycobacterium.
And what is LJ?
Culture on LJ. Oh, I should know that.
You know, Christina?
No, that's why I stumbled over it, because I was thinking, what is it? What is it?
Yeah.
So I can't
It's
remember.
very cool. Very interesting. All right, Daniel, you're next.
Okay. Jillian writes, hello, fellow TWiPers and esteemed hosts. I'm writing you from a snowy Ottawa, Canada, where it's currently -30°C, -22°F, like the conversion there. And the forecast calls for flocks of yahoos in trucks clogging up the downtown core. I don't know what she's talking about. So I've decided to pass my time catching up on TWiP to drown out the hunks worse than the geese they are. In terms of my answer, I believe that this gentleman is suffering from an intense and prolonged infection of sarcoptic mites, complicated by untreated diabetes, additionally complicated by a likely staph infection, leading to rheumatic heart disease, possibly brought on by the diabetes mites 1-2 punch. First, the parasites. Infection with human scabies is characterized by an intensely itchy red rash, typically in areas with skin folds, such as the elbows, knees, abdomen. The areas between the fingers are not typically described, but I would hazard this is likely due to hand-washing behaviors, which could inhibit the mites' colonization of this space and or serve to reduce the buildup of the parasite detritus, as it's the body's reaction to the parasites' proteins and feces, which causes symptoms of infection. Rather like the klaxon ringing flag flappers outside my window, it's not their presence that's the issue, but that they are poorly behaved. Additionally, the itchiness associated with mites is often worse at night, which Dr. Griffin mentioned. Further, it's telling that his family began showing symptoms of the parasite several weeks after him. Reactivity to the detritus of the mites can take up to 2 months from time of infection. So this delayed pattern is what we'd expect to see in his cohabitants. Sarcoptes scabii has a global distribution, and unfortunately, it is commonly associated with vulnerable populations in areas with cramped living conditions and poor sanitation, and was listed one of the neglected tropical diseases by WHO in 2017. In terms of diagnosis and treatment, if the equipment is available, then a dermoscope could be used to view irritated areas of skin scrapings, could be examined to look for the mites and their detritus. Considering that the family as a whole appears infected, looking at bed linens and other upholstery could be useful as well if that option is better received. In terms of treatment, I found a very interesting preprint outlining some of the challenges of typical treatment strategies in refugee migrant camps. Richardson et al. And it would seem that oral ivermectin, if the people driving past left any on the shelves, would be ideal. In terms of other complications and where it all comes together, this individual noted that his first issue was actually frequent urination, thirst, and weight loss. These are typical signs of diabetes mellitus, which seems borne out by his elevated blood glucose on examination. Unfortunately, both prolonged mange infection and untreated diabetes are risk factors for bacterial infections such as those from staph or strep, which can themselves progress to pneumonia and or rheumatic heart disease. As this individual is reporting problems breathing but no cough, I would hazard that they are in the early stages of RHD, rheumatic heart disease. Along with treatment of the individual in question, it would be ideal to culture the bacteria to ensure that this isn't an outbreak of a more serious nature, mange aside, if there are several individuals in his family showing signs of respiratory illness. Thank you so much for all your wonderful work in this fantastic show. Although I once had rose-colored dreams of Arctic parasitology, hence my humans, I don't know her response to treatment, I am now a digital educational specialist and really appreciate the chance to participate. Also, can I just take a moment to say that, Christina, you are my absolute hero. It's been so wonderful to hear from a female in the field. Jillian.
Thank you. Thank you, Jillian.
Dixon.
Christine writes, Dear TWiP team, I'm a long-term listener of TWiP and pandemic listener of TWiV. This is the first time I dare send in a guess. I'm working as a neurologist in Oslo, Norway. Nice and sunny, plus 5 degrees Celsius, still windy after a storm last night, too warm and too little snow for the season. This case seems to be a question of Occam's razor. Entities must not be multiplied unnecessarily. Find one diagnose that explains all of the patient's symptoms, or Hickham's dictum. The patient can have as many diagnoses as he damn well pleases. Apparently, doctors prefer the razor. And he gives a reference for Oxford Handbook of Clinical Medicine, 10th edition, page 4, etc., etc. Maybe there is a parasite that elegantly explains everything, but in that case, I don't know it. Dr. Griffin also pointed strongly towards a combination of causes. I think the patient has 3 conditions. 1, thirst. Decreased production of urine and weight loss is consistent with diabetes mellitus. Blood glucose 300 confirms the diagnosis. 2, the parasite involved here is scabies, Sarcoptes scabii, causing scabies. The description of the rash, the itching, and the whole family affected and living in a refugee camp all fits well with that. He probably has COVID. 1 week of general viral symptoms worsening in the second week with an oxygen saturation of around 80 sounds like it. Living in crowded conditions will increase his risk, and with an untreated diabetes and an older age, he is at higher risk for developing more severe disease than his family. Thank you so much for your excellent work, Christine.
I think people know how I feel about Occam, right? Occam was not a physician.
No.
Eric writes, hello, TWiPers. Greetings from Seattle. I haven't sent a guess for a while, but I look forward to every episode and every case. This month, Daniel presented an intriguing case, and I'm grateful that we got the hint that there may be multiple things going on here, because tying them all into one parasitic infection would be tough. I'm going for a triple. For the rash that he and his family members are afflicted with, I'll go with scabies. For the acute fever and trouble breathing, COVID-19 is the most likely diagnosis. For the high thirst and glucose and urination, type 2 diabetes seems to be the most likely. Not a parasite, but serious nonetheless. I'll even go for one more as an blastocystis as well because of the circumstances. I so much appreciate all your Twix episodes. I'm now listening to the TWiV with John Udell, and I'm just blown away. What a great episode. All the best, Eric.
Lise writes, hello, dear TWiP professors. I'm delighted to be back sharing my thoughts with you on this fascinating case from the beautiful island of St. Martin at 80 degrees Fahrenheit. I hope the incubator is keeping you as warm as I am in the Caribbean. In regards to the last episode, I believe this man is presenting with diabetes due to frequent urination and increased glucose, and I will venture into the wild and say that he could have COPD due to the heavy smoking and decreased saturation. I don't bet my money on the previous diagnoses, but I'm fairly sure that the parasite that the patient is presenting with is Sarcoptes scabii. This arthropod burrows into the skin, creating tunnels through the top upper layers where it lays eggs. Fascinating. How am I so certain, you wonder? Well, he's living in a very crowded area, and the intense itching is localized to webbing in between the fingers and elbows. Unfortunately, this is transmitted through direct contact, so that's why we see a similar presentation in his close family members. I will leave all the juicy parasitic details to you so I can keep this email short, but all this information comes from the best parasitology book ever written, Parasitic Diseases, 7th edition. All right, back to the top, Christina.
Eyal writes, dear sages of biological knowledge and common sense, greetings from sunny Sydney, Australia, where the temperature right now on the northern beaches is 30 C, with hardly any wind and 62% humidity. Frankly, a bit too warm, but really, I shouldn't be complaining. First, I would like to say that I'm not medically trained in any way or even properly educated in biology or chemistry, mainly did mathematics and physics in uni. However, after stumbling across Professor Racaniello's Virology course and then Professor Barker's, followed by all things Twix, I've been inspired to expand my knowledge in biology and biochemistry. I also find Professor de Paumier's and Dr. Griffing's parasitism course mind-blowing and at points downright disturbing. Thank you all so much for the knowledge and perspective you share. I've never submitted a guest before, as I normally listen to the TWiP episodes too late, but this time I thought I'll venture a guess. My guess for the case of the 60-year-old male in the Rohingya camp who has been waking up at night for 3 months is Scabies. Listening to the description of the cramped and dirty, dusty living conditions and the type and location of the itchy rash reminded me of my time in the Israeli army. In cases where beddings were not properly ventilated and de-dusted, there used to be scabies outbreaks that were extremely transmissive, and the rash would keep people up at night scratching themselves bloody. In my mind, the rest of the symptoms seem like much bigger issue, but probably a red herring in the parasitism context. My guess would be that the thirst and loss of weight is a result of untreated diabetes, which I think matches the high blood sugar. As for the fact that he has been feeling crummy, and Daniel mentioned that he's not the only one in the camp who has been feeling poorly, and the difficulty in breathing, I would guess that the culprit is Omicron. I guess from a different podcast. Being completely out of my depth here, I would guess that treatment should be dexamethasone and oral ivermectin, lol, for the scabies, with treatment plan to manage his diabetes, once he hopefully recovers. Please keep up your amazing work. Eyal.
Daniel.
Martha writes, Dear TWiP team, I hope this finds you all well. I'm responding to the case of the 60-year-old man in a Myanmar-adjacent refugee camp who developed diabetes, then a rash, then respiratory symptoms. This has me a bit stuck trying to come up with a single parasite to explain the whole story. First, the etiology of his diabetes. He is not of the usual age to develop type 1 diabetes. He does fit the stereotype of someone developing type 2 diabetes. It could be one of the types of secondary diabetes, such as iron overload or cassava toxicity. Malnutrition-related diabetes is described as developing in a younger person. There is LADA, latent autoimmune diabetes of the adult. Diabetes could arise from pancreatic damage by cysticercosis or hydatidosis, but those are animal tapeworms that have hit a dead end in a human host. Let us suppose that it is either Echinococcus granulosus or Taenia solium that have formed cysts in the pancreas, and the host now has diabetes. From the effect of diabetes on the immune system, the person is now prone to infection by another parasite or by reactivating a latent parasite. Since his younger, non-diabetic, and non-smoking family members also have the rash symptoms, let us say that it is a new infection. Given his history, it is likely he will develop more severe symptoms. I'm, of course, ignoring the fact that he could have COVID-19. We are looking for a human parasite that can cause a rash, and during its migration in the host has a phase passing through the lung. Ascaris lumbricoides and Celestoma duodenale and Strongyloides stercoralis all have the ability to cause pneumonitis. Lumbricoides antigens trigger allergic response in the lungs and could possibly cause an atopic dermatitis. Duodenale produces pruritic dermatitis at the site of entry. S. stercoralis can produce larva curans rash and also petechial purpura on the abdomen. The history of rash in the abdomen makes me weigh in favor of strongyloides as the cause of his disease. Also, thanks for the book. It arrived at a good time to help me sort out this case. All the best to you, Martha.
Dixon.
Chelsea writes, I have been listening to all of the This Week in Blank podcasts since just before the pandemic. I love them all, including urban agriculture. I'm just an infectious disease control practitioner from Alberta, Canada, but thought I would try to solve the parasite puzzle of the month. Hearing Daniel say there might be a few things going on with this client, I am thinking the following. Getting up at night to urinate, thirsty, and losing weight sounds like common indicators for diabetes to me. Rash on elbows, abdomen, and between the webs of the fingers sounds very textbook scabies. Headache, fever, cough, trouble breathing sounds very much like a case of COVID. According to a variety of sources, frequent urination, often at night, being very thirsty, and losing weight without trying are the first 3 symptoms of diabetes. Correct or incorrect, I look forward to writing in again. Cheers. And she's a infectious control practitioner in the Chinook Regional Hospital of Alberta.
Andrew writes, Kia ora from Pungaroa. It's hot here, 31°C, so I am melting slowly into my keyboard. So I'm grateful that this month's case is not too hard. At least that's how it seems. The gentleman who is a refugee in Cox's Bazar has what the Germans call Glück im Unglück, luck in the midst of misfortune. Why? Because he probably has type 2 diabetes indicated by his unusual thirst and frequent need to urinate and elevated glucose. He also has, I think, scabies, the parasitic component that is needed to make it a TWiP case. Most worryingly, he seems to have COVID-19 with flu-like symptoms and an ox-sat down in the 80s. The luck is in that he has been forced to seek medical attention. Had he not, untreated diabetes would most likely have led to an early death. Should he survive his COVID, he will be able to get treatment and make lifestyle changes that should keep his diabetes in check and live a longer life working in his shop and being there for his family. Had he not been forced to seek treatment, his life expectancy would have been curtailed. The whole family will need to be treated for scabies with a scabicide and thorough washing of clothing and bedding, something that might be difficult in a refugee camp but necessary. The family should also be tested for COVID. Vaccinations in these camps only started late last year, according to Al Jazeera. So there will be a lot of people there who are vulnerable to infection and serious disease. I read that while COVID has had my attention, it seems an immigrant species of mosquito, Anopheles stevensi, has taken up residence in the Horn of Africa. Mosquitoes as vectors of Plasmodium vivax and P. falciparum, turning what was mainly a rural problem into an urban one. Am I right in thinking that this is a very scary development? And he provides a link for that. Andrew.
Yeah, I actually find that quite concerning. I mean, that's one of these things. A lot of times you travel to these areas like Accra, and you're, I'm in the urban area. There's not much malaria in the urban area. It's really out in those rural areas. It's by the Volta Delta. But yeah, when you start having malaria move into the cities, that is a big game changer.
I would agree.
All right, Daniel, what do we have here? What's next?
We have a lot of guesses here. So now y'all get to guess. So let's start with Christina, ladies first.
Well, I think I should maybe not be guessing because I already know the case. You presented this to my class. I would feel like a bit of a cheat if I was giving you a guess.
We're recusing you. Yes, and actually that was nice, right? That was just a few weeks ago. I was doing my presentations for the Glasgow course, right? Program that you run there.
Yes.
And
it was brilliant.
So.
And not
this was on Zoom, I guess. It was online, right?
Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately, I did not get to be there for Burns Night. So hopefully next year.
Hopefully next year, yeah.
Right.
All right, Dixon, what about you?
Well, I'm sort of in concurrence with a lot of the guesses. I think scabies is, of course, the cause of the rash. I do believe that he has type 2 diabetes. He's an older gentleman. If he were younger, I would start to suspect maybe type 1, but you can easily distinguish those two, I presume. So the fact that he has an elevated blood sugar of 300 is a giveaway, plus his frequent urination. So that's 2. And then, of course, COVID, and I think COVID is everywhere. So I suspect that he's got these 3.
All right. Vincent?
So the symptoms are clearly, urination, thirst, etc. That's diabetes, right? To my untrained eye.
Yeah, and confirmed, with the high blood glucose. So yes.
What's his A1C? Yeah. No, serious.
We don't know, but actually, if you want to look at someone with a 300, it's going to be quite elevated.
So this is type 2.
Just to give our listeners a sense of diabetes, normal would be this glycosylation of so the A1C less than 7, really less than 6 is probably truly normal. So this gentleman's probably going to have an A1C 9 or something.
Gotcha.
I mean, I like to think the rash is scabies, but he didn't talk about being in between the fingers like scabies often is, right? So elbows, abdomen.
That's the rash.
I'm not sure. What?
That's the rash. The scabies themselves are found between the fingers. There's no rash between the fingers. That's where the organism lives.
Okay.
But the rash is other places. So it is consistent, Vincent. I think it is.
All right, very good. Then I will make it scabies. And oxygen sat in the 80s. What else these days but COVID? Right?
My goodness.
Yeah. Sweeping through the camp. Yeah. And so that's he did test positive for COVID, treated him for the scabies, got him on therapy for the diabetes. Wow. This gentleman is doing better. It's just I always like to reinforce that Occam was not a physician. Could have multiple things going on. It's important to keep the eyes open. This is again this issue with equity challenges. Here's this massively crowded camp. This is a place we need vaccines.
Absolutely.
Time to give away a book.
Right.
We had 11 guesses, if I believe. We had a few people who have already won.
So 11 non-book winning guesses.
Yes. So we will pick a random number between 1 and 11.
Would you like a drum roll?
Sure, go ahead.
They always say between, but it's sort of like and including, right?
It's including, yes. Because sometimes we get 1 and sometimes we get 11, but this time we got 8. Who is number 8? Number 8 is Eric from Seattle.
All right,
Eric.
So Eric, send your address to TWiP at microbe.tv, and you will get a book really soon, because actually I enlisted my daughter to pack them up and ship them out, and she has done that. And so, as Martha said, Martha's local in the U.S. She's got hers, and the international shipments will take longer. TWiP at microbe.tv. All right, we have a paper to tell you about.
Indeed.
Did you pick this, Daniel?
So I picked it, but then Christina volunteered. She does a much better job.
All right.
I'm just going to be honest. Right? So Christina, I'll defer to you, and then I'm hoping that Dixon and I have lots of comments. Mosquito net use in early childhood and survival to adulthood in Tanzania, which was a very topic, much discussed on my recent trip to Ghana. But Christina, I defer.
Yeah, so this is a paper that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. And so the first author is Günther Fink, who is in the Swiss Tropical Institute, Swiss Tropical and Public Health Institute and the University of Basel, I think. And then the final author is Joanna Schellenberg, who also think is in Basel. But there's contributors that are from the Ifakara Health Institute in Tanzania, and the Mailman School of Public Health, Columbia University, and also the London School of Tropical Hygiene and Medicine. And actually, before I just go into the paper, I have been to that hospital in Ifakara one night and day in 1988, so a long time ago, when I was traveling in Tanzania with my grandfather. So we were visiting. That was an amazing place. I'm sure it has changed a lot, but good memories there. So this paper really looks at whether early childhood mosquito nest use has got an effect on survival into adulthood in Tanzania. So, and I'm just going to have to dig out my notes here. There aren't actually all that many studies that have been looking into that. So we know more about the short-term effects of bed net use in children. And so the hypothesis is really that it is thought that maybe having bed nets in early childhood could potentially have a negative impact on survival into adulthood, because maybe the children do not develop a functional immunity, but there isn't actually any or much data at all that shows that. So this study does look into that. So previous studies have looked into this, but they were quite short in duration, about 7 years, and none of them could find any negative effects on death from malaria shown in the older children, and because of early net use. But this study has actually been going on for an amazing duration of 22 years. And I think that fact on its own, is really astonishing. So it was a 22-year prospective cohort study. So they looked over a long period of time. So they followed up individuals, and data is collected as the characteristic and circumstances changes. So in this type of epidemiological study. So all the children were born between January 1998 and August 2000. So that was a time span of 2.5 years. And so these children were followed up, and I'll give you the numbers, how many children there were in the study when I talk to the results. I'm just kind of trying to set the scene a little bit. So these children were then followed up every 4 months by visiting healthcare professionals. And then between 2014, there was a bit of a gap, but there was monitoring whether the children were still alive through routine visits. And then in 2019, a big follow-up survey was undertaken, so checking who had survived. And also that included quite a lot of people, even people who had moved, because the health records seem to be good. So actually the study is pure epidemiology and statistics, and I might need a little bit of help. So they were using different models, so different statistical models to analyze the data that they had collected. And I think it probably too much to mention what these are and what they do, but kind of one model looked at just kind of one variable, and the other model analyzed multiple variables and confounding factors, which, for example, also relate to household income and the time to travel to the nearest healthcare center, and also the year of birth. So they looked at quite a lot of different things. So I think the main interest that they had, they wanted to see if there is, so they wanted to actually just see, I just have too many notes. I shouldn't make that many notes. Can't find my place.
That's a line from Amadeus, by the way, the movie. It's just a segue. Too many notes when... We'll get back to that later.
Yes, I remember that. I remember that.
You have the right number. You just have to read them right. That's all. Right?
But while you're looking for notes, should I do sort of a high level summary of what? So this is interesting. This is observational, right?
Yes,
so
I found them.
Going,
Good.
Yeah. Okay. So they're going out and they're really, they're looking at a lot of variables, but the high level is they're really asking, are these kids sleeping under a treated bed net, right? So about a quarter of them, are saying that they're doing it all the time. So they say, and then they sort of break them down into another half. Half of the time I'm doing it, a quarter never, right? And so the big thing we'll get to is this analysis is
right.
And I think this is the important background. And this was a discussion I had recently when I was in Ghana. So here you are, you're in Ghana. And the Anopheles mosquitoes are, we say nighttime, but I also say darkness feeders, right? So, if you sleep under your bed net every night, it's almost like you're not in Africa when it comes to malaria, right? You're never going to get bit. And now you go on a trip and you don't have your bed net, and oh my gosh, it's like you're a foreigner who's never been exposed. So this concern is, we do see all the deaths in those first 5 years. So maybe go ahead and you protect these kids for the first 5 years. But now they stop using the bed net because they get a little older. And now is it like they've come from a foreign country? They're going to get malaria. They're going to die. They're not going to have this pre-immunity that we talk about. So with that background.
Thank you. I actually wondered, would they really stop using bed nets when they're about 5? When they get older, would they not continue to be using bed nets? That was one question I had, really.
Yes.
I don't think it comes into the paper, so they didn't discuss that.
I'll leave that for discussion, but no, that's a great question.
Okay. So actually just the study population, this was a really big study. So there were 6,706 children enrolled, and that's a lot. And it came from, I think, around 20 different locations in Tanzania. And actually, I just want to maybe say, a lot of children were lost. So during the first period of the study, so there were over 400 children that died. And I just kind of wanted to take a step back and just look at that mortality rate. That's really high. I calculated this at 6%, which was actually below the national average for Tanzania at that time, which I think was 12%. I looked that up in the year 2000. And if we compare that with the UK, also in the year 2000, the child mortality rate was below 1%. So really, really quite staggering. And I think sometimes it's worthwhile remembering that a lot of children die. So anyway, from the original 6,700 children, they followed up just over 5,000. And so I'm losing it again there. So they first looked at the exposure to treated nets. Actually, the supplementary data also shows the data for untreated nets. I don't know if we want to go into that at all. Maybe not. Maybe the effect is lower, really, overall. But they did find, as Daniel already said, about a quarter of the children were always sleeping under a net. A quarter of children never slept under a net. And half of the children sometimes slept under a net and sometimes they didn't. And that's all treated nets. And they did find that over the 3 years of enrollment, the number of children sleeping under net actually increased from 21% to 31%. And I don't know if that was an effect of frequent visits and education and maybe talking to people or availability of nets. I'm not sure. They didn't say that. And also, actually, between 1998 and 2003, the reported sleeping under a treated net increased really quite dramatically overall, from 34% to 77%. So I think that's interesting data that's come out from that. And they did find that there was a lot of variability in relation to ownership of treated nets, but again, this changed with a positive trend over time. And in that first table, I don't know if this is an open access paper actually, but if you do look at the first table in that paper, overall, the mortality rate is significantly higher in those children who never sleep under a bed net, which I suppose is to be expected. And the mortality, the death per 1,000 children, is highest in the children who never sleep under a net. So that was this.
Yeah, I think table 2 is probably what you're referring to, which is...
Yes, sorry, table 2. Did I say? No, I said table. No, yes, table 2. Yeah, sorry.
But that's okay. Because there's an interesting, I don't know, I should say, so we say trend, or there's interesting data here. Mm-hmm. So never slept under a treated net, the highest deaths per 1,000 person years. But then the next two are sort of interesting. What about sometimes versus always? What is better? And sometimes had a lower mortality.
That's right.
Oh, yes.
Which I thought was interesting. So the always, so the deaths per 1,000, never slept was about 15, sometimes 3.5, always 6.3.
How
so,
does that
almost
work?
Twice as high, always versus sometimes. What is this? Everything in moderation, including using your bed net? I don't know.
And actually, that's actually consistent in the different birth years. That's a consistent trend. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I certainly couldn't think of a good reason.
How would you explain that, Daniel?
Yeah, how do you do that?
Yeah, so how do we explain that? And I think it may get at something we talked a little bit about. There may be a certain exposure issue. So there may be some relevance to this concern of not having any immunity. So, you're breastfeeding still in some of these areas might continue to about 3 years of age. So that probably some degree of protection. But then you get this limited amount of exposure period. Occasionally you're not. You might get bitten. You might get a sort of a low. But if you're always outside, you're just getting bit over and over. And, that's sort of the original state prior to bed net. So there may be some certain advantage here. And I guess we'll get into the issue of, do people continue to not sleep or sleep under bed nets? It's regionally different, right? Certain parts of the world, they really like the nets because, particularly some of the original nets have a really tight weave, and they actually work almost as like walls in your house. So they give you privacy, they give you warmth. I know in the WHO it's like, oh, we need ones with bigger holes. They're just fine. People are not as excited because you live in this sort of a one room with a roof, and then the bed nets created some sort of limited privacy. Privacy is nice, So and then when you get to parts of Africa, East Africa has a higher percent of use of the bed nets. You go to West Africa, particularly Ghana, which has a lot of malaria. They're not using the bed nets very much at all. So it is interesting because you're going to live in this area your whole life. Getting through those first 5 years is critical, right? Because that's going to be your highest mortality. But is there something about occasionally still sort of living in Africa, still, the occasional Anopheles bite, does that help you? And I think this is sort of raises some interesting questions.
I think it would actually be really interesting to find out why in the west of Africa bed nets are used less than in East Africa, maybe.
Socially it's quite different. Yeah, it was very interesting. And so on this most recent trip, one of the Germans, Gunther, physician who lives up in the mountains, everyone, I felt like I would always step back because I knew Gunther was going to start berating everybody. But he would even quiz the physicians, do you sleep under a bed net? And most of them are like, no, I don't do that. And wherever you stay, there were no bed nets, which is interesting. It's the first time I've gone to Africa and not slept under a treated bed net. I usually bring them with me. So this was sort of interesting. Culturally, there's not much of a bed net use in adults, particularly, maybe in some of the children.
Does it get really hot under a bed net?
It can.
Yeah, it can. It can, particularly the original, those TWiP that used to be used. I did see bed nets being used, right? Keep the chickens, fishing, other popular uses for bed nets.
If we then kind of look at overall survival, really, and that's shown in figure 2, where you have lots of graphs. And actually, what they found that overall 80% of the death occurs in the 5 years of age, with a peak in the first year. And that's really, I think that's not an unexpected result. And then kind of the long-term outcome is they could see that 91% of the children that always slept or were reported to always sleep under a bed net in early childhood, they survived in this study. So 91% of the children that were participants. But of the children with no early use of treated bed nets, only 80% of the children survived. So I think that's quite a dramatic difference. And they also saw that there is quite a strong, and that data is from the supplementary figures, really. They also saw that there's a strong correlation between the ownership of treated nets with parasitemia, as seen on blood films. So the more treated nets there were, the less parasitemia there was. And I think that is also not really unexpected. And this holds actually up for children of a younger age and also an older age. So even if they maybe don't sleep under the net, but obviously the mosquitoes that sit on the outside of the net, they're also being affected by the insecticide. So probably have an overall reduction of mosquitoes in the house, I would think. So yeah, I think that's really encouraging data, isn't it? And then we have table 3. And here in this table, they were really looking at the risk ratio, so the hazard ratio of death, how that varied in the different populations. So they found out that at each 10% increase in early childhood use of nets meant a 10% lower risk of death. So the more nets that are used, the fewer deaths there are. And that's the long-term survival that they looked at here in this table, not the early childhood survival. So, and actually, if they used the bed net sometimes, so maybe more than 50% of the times, there was also a lower risk of death compared to people who used it for less than half the time. So again, I think that confirms that correlation between bed net use and, less death. And overall, So if children were reported to have used the net all the time, they had overall a 46% lower risk of death compared to children that did not use a net or were not reported to have been sleeping under the net. And again, that's adult survival that they looked at. And actually, so they looked at that in the individual level, but they also looked at these data on a village level, and the numbers seem to be fairly similar and consistent. So it's definitely worth it to invest in bed nets, I think. So yeah, and I think
it's encouraging.
That's probably I think that's probably the most important data now that I've mentioned. So, and maybe the final data, I think I may have mentioned it at beginning, but the risk of death was reduced by 40% during the initial study period. So it has got a really, really big effect on young children, on the death of young children. And actually, I did look at the number for untreated nets here because I was curious, and there is still a 34% reduction in the risk of death, even if your bed nets are not insecticide treated. So I think treated bed nets are best, but if you just have an ordinary net without insecticide treated, that's still better than none. So, and I think in conclusion, we can say that there's a strong evidence of survival gains from using treated nets in children under 5. And so I think with that study, we now have a bit more information on the long-term survival of childhood use of nets. So there is a definite long-term benefit of the use of treated nets in early childhood. And there seems to be no evidence that the functional immunity is not developed if the children aren't exposed early on. But the study did not actually look at immunological measures of immune function. But I think the trend seems to be that the functional immunity has developed over time. But that would, I suppose, we can't really do that retrospectively, look at the immune function, but maybe that would be interesting in a further study.
That would be interesting. I guess you could take maybe some of these adults and then compare, the ones. So we certainly know it helps survive into adulthood. We're now seeing that there isn't a negative effect. And you could look. I think this supports the concept that, the people that used them early on, they're doing fine. They don't now somehow fail to get protected. They're not all dropping off like flies or mosquitoes when they get malaria. In adults. So it's really, I think, very encouraging data.
I would agree.
It's really, really interesting.
It's interesting. The history of the use of bed nets goes pretty far back, but there was a champion from our Earth Institute, the director, Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, who championed the use of bed nets 20, 30, maybe 25 years ago, and started to preach the gospel that if you don't use a bed net, you're going to die. And it should be impregnated with. He really did. Remember, though, that he was an economist.
Yeah, he's a passionate man. I think that's probably.
He was an economist, though. He was not a malariologist. But he had a lot of help, obviously, in promulgating this behavior. And he was highly criticized for it because a lot of people had an attitude about his forthrightness, so to speak. He was not afraid to speak his mind. And he made enemies by speaking bluntly. Like, if you don't use these nets, you're going to kill children, that sort of thing. But nonetheless, he popularized their use. And he came under a lot of criticism for it later on, because while the death rate from malaria dropped by 50% in the areas which adopted bed nets to begin with, and particularly pyrethrum impregnated bed nets, the criticism was instantly raised. Well, all you're going to do eventually is to select for resistance from pyrethrum in mosquitoes, and then the bed net impregnation program will suffer greatly for that. Well, as we just saw, the bed nets without impregnation work just as well. We're not killing any mosquitoes, but we're not killing any people either. If you use the nets, it's fine. A recent article in The Lancet. Well, first of all, the data started to pour back. Oh, look, we've got resistant mosquitoes now, and we've got higher rates of malaria transmission. You can never get it below 50% because the mosquitoes are resistant now. And the moment you stick your egg or leg or arm out of the bed net to reach for a glass of water, you'll get bitten by one. Remember, you have to get bitten by 1,000 mosquitoes before one of them transmits the infection. That's the ratio of numbers of infected mosquitoes to bites. But you're bitten thousands of times during the day. That doesn't count, different mosquitoes. At night, don't get bitten and you're fine. So a recent article in Lancet, which I looked up and I have on my other computer, which I will send to Vincent for posting, vindicates Jeffrey Sachs. He said, this article says there is no evidence whatsoever that in any area where impregnated bed nets are being used now, there are droves of resistant mosquitoes to those insecticides. There's no evidence for it. So the prediction that it would occur was somewhat mean-spirited, I would say, as a response to Jeffrey Sachs's cavalier approach to the adoption of these nets. But in the end, he was right. And this is a long-term study that sort of backs that up. And not sponsored by Jeffrey Sachs. This was a WHO-sponsored result?
But I have to say, I think it's important that this study was done.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
I mean, because
absolutely.
it's a valid concern to say, because a lot of things we've done stuff and then afterwards we've said, ouch, ouch, we shouldn't have done all that iron supplementation.
Exactly.
And so I think it was, I think this is reasonable. And I sort of bring the science. This, addresses that valid concern. That this could have had, unexpected consequences. So it's reassuring. I think it's important that this study was done and happy that it turned out this way.
Absolutely. Now, I must say there's a caveat to this, of course, and that is that Jeffrey Sachs was a member of a lot of health commissions and health panels, and he's unfortunately been asked to leave those situations by the heads of those meetings and the heads of those organizations simply based on his strident approach to getting his point of view up front. And it's unfortunate because he really does have a lot of good things to say, and it's just unfortunate that some people are put off by the way he says them.
Thank you, Christina.
Yes. This is not easy
You're welcome.
stuff.
Sorry I lost my plot in the middle.
It's okay. No worries.
I was just distracted.
There was a lot in that paper.
So you're stuck.
It was a lot, yeah.
We're really stuck.
So are we ready for a new case?
No. Dixon has a hero.
Oh, you have a hero.
Well,
yes.
It's not a hero for this show, though.
Oh, it's not?
No, but it just appeared on Google. When I turned on Google this morning, they were honoring a Japanese virologist for, I guess, inventing the first measles vaccine and chickenpox vaccine.
Yeah, chickenpox. Yeah,
and his name was Takahashi. I wonder if he's related to the Yuzo Takahashi that I know from parasitology. Things I probably not, but there are a lot of Takahashis in Japan. I don't have a parasite hero this time.
We can have virologist heroes too.
Well, absolutely.
We're cross-fertilizing.
There's a crossover. They're all pathogens. Yes. Come on.
So today is his birthday.
That's right.
He was born on February 17th, 1928. That's why it popped up on Google.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
All right, Daniel, let's have another case.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Daniel has a little book here full of cases.
Look at that.
Yeah. So when I travel, I always jot down some notes. So
wow, impressive.
This was actually a Charles Schwab. This was given to me as a gift. So this is going to be we're going to be talking about two individuals. I'm going to give the sort of hint that they have the same issue. But we're going to start with the teenage boy, and then we're going to discuss the father. So I went to this small village. We're in Ghana just a couple weeks ago. And this village is right by this really fast-flowing river. And the story is this teenage boy, his father is a farmer, and this teenage boy starts to develop a severe itchy rash just changes in the color of the skin on his legs. It's really particularly the right leg. He actually feels like he's just got to scratch this all the time, and he's noticing that certain areas are darker, certain areas are lighter. But then he also describes a little bit about what he does. So he and his father live nearby, but not in this village. And his father does farming right along this area of the river. And so now we're going to discuss a little bit about the father. So what this young boy does is he goes after school and he visits his father, and he and his father go swimming in this river. They spend time in the evenings together, but then they travel back to where he lives. So he's not really part of this community. And I think this is important because this community is part of a mass drug administration campaign for some issue that is very hyper-endemic in this region. So now let's talk about the father. So I meet the father as well. So meet the son, then meet the father. So the father is actually in his 70s. And the father notes that he has this 2 to 3 centimeter nodule on his left knee. He has another one, interesting, a second nodule in the groin area. He says he doesn't have any other problems. We ask him about vision, and he says, no, my vision is completely fine as long as you're very close to me. So just to sort of put that in context, because if you step back, then he's starting to have some visual issues. I'm able to examine these nodules, and I'll describe them. They're very firm. It's sort of interesting. It's actually fixed to the skin. Mm-hmm. So the nodule seems like really much attached to the skin, and you're not able to move, but it's quite firm. Now, what I will tell you from a diagnostic standpoint is both he and his son have a diagnostic skin snip. And that's how we're going to get the diagnosis here.
Daniel, when they swim, do they towel off vigorously?
They don't.
Wrong question.
They don't.
Wrong
they
question.
don't. But that's I like that question.
No.
Okay.
Do you have a diagnostic skin snip or a positive diagnostic skin snip?
So they do a skin snip, and there's something that they're able to see under the.
So Vincent, you have to list it as a positive diagnostic skin snip.
Yes.
Daniel, do they have AIDS, either one?
No, actually, this is interesting. This community, so they're both HIV negative. Don't drink, don't smoke. We don't have any other medical issues that we're aware of. And the exam on the boy, there is, if you look on the bottom of the leg, they're actually, particularly the right lower extremity, there really are these areas where it's light, it's dark, and he's in high school, right? He's a teenage boy, so he's concerned about what is going on. Why does my leg look like this? Why is it just so itchy? And then, the dad actually is a little bit concerned. What's this large nodule? Actually, the other nodule in the groin area is smaller.
Did they both have the skin snip or just the father?
So they both
did.
Yeah, they both got tested.
Okay.
And does the boy have a nodule?
The boy did not. We could not find a nodule on the boy.
Really?
Yeah, it doesn't mean that there isn't one somewhere,
That's
but
true.
we're not able to identify one. So.
And no blood tests for other pathogens.
We're not going to give you any of that information. But
Oh, too bad. That's
All right.
an interesting case. That's a very interesting case. So you say the boy and the father live in different regions.
So the interesting thing is they come to farm in this area where everyone else is part of a mass drug administration. They don't live in that village, so they're not included. So they're not receiving whatever this drug is that everyone else is getting twice a year.
Gotcha.
So where do they swim? In this community or at home?
In that community. So they come, they hang out by that river.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a cool.
I think it's the hanging out that was the key point, isn't it?
Hang on
Hanging out
those
at
words.
the river. All right.
Very interesting case, Daniel.
That is
Very.
TWiP 203, microbe.tv/TWiP. Send your case guesses or any other comments, always positive, to TWiP at microbe.tv. If you like what we do, consider supporting us. So you can go to two places. You can go to parasiteswithoutborders.com or microbe.tv/contribute. Both organizations are nonprofits, so your contributions are tax deductible. Daniel Griffin's at Columbia University Irving Medical Center, parasiteswithoutborders.com. Thank you, Daniel.
Oh, thank you.
Dixon de Pommiers at Racaniello.org, thelivingriver.org. Thank you, Dixon.
You're welcome.
And Christina Naul is at the University of Glasgow. Thanks, Christina.
Thank you. It was really good fun. I enjoyed that.
It is.
I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at virology.ws. I'd like to thank the American Society for Microbiology for their support of TWiP and Ronald Jenkins for the music. You've been listening to This Week in Parasitism. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon. Another TWiP
is
parasitic.
parasitic.